Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 8th of December. Today we're doing a front update focusing on Zaporozhye, Avdiivka, and Bakhmut. Let's begin by looking at the Orkiv sector, specifically to the west of Robotyne. There's been an increase in Russian attacks, and we have geolocated footage pointing to a minor advance by the Russian forces in the direction of Ukrainian-controlled trenches, which I'll mark with this blue rectangle. And so the goal of the Russian attacks generally along this vector over here would be to undermine the cohesiveness of Ukraine's forces in Robotyne, trying to flank them, trying to establish firing positions that are closer to the supply lines leading in and out of the village, to undermine supplies and reinforcements from arriving. And this would all make it harder for Robotyne to be used as a springboard for Ukrainian forces to attack further south towards the northern outskirts of Novoprokopivka. And so in response to these Russian attacks, you have the 33rd Mechanized Brigade, its drone unit called the Rubak unit. They released footage of their FPVs hitting Russian forces in this geolocated area. They hit a Russian infantry cluster, and then in this geolocated footage, they hit a Russian BTR as it was making its way to the Ukrainian-controlled trenches. So in terms of the Russian gains, we can measure it like this generally within this red perimeter. So those are the recent Russian advances, and they're further corroborated by a video released by the 71st Regiment of the 42nd Motorized Rifle Division, which shows Russian soldiers as they made their way to a damaged Leopard 2A4 tank. This Leopard tank was damaged due to 2 FPV strikes, which are shown in this video linked on my map, and then 2 ATGM strikes. And the Russian claim, they say that the actual crew of the tank was killed, and so I have the link to the video of the strikes in the description for the map. Despite these Russian attacks on the flanks, the Ukrainians continue to send very small infantry squads past their forward positions located on this fortified hill to the south of Robotyne, and they are trying to attack even further south towards the northern outskirts of Novoprokopivka, and they're mainly doing that along 2 attack vectors, specifically these tree lines over here, and then potentially this tree line over here, so that's 3. And we have geolocated footage released by Russia's Beaver FPV drone units, which shows a strike on a Ukrainian dugout, which is rather close to the northern outskirts of Novoprokopivka. Although having positions next to the outskirts is not enough to actually develop a full attack in that direction. Now, in terms of the Ukrainian advance, it really amounts to about 700 meters. But as I said before, these are very small groups of infantry that are forced to rotate out regularly due to being exposed and due to having a lack of support as they reach a no man's land. In this geolocated video, which was really taken around the early week of December, it shows an infantry squad of the 65th Mechanized Brigade, so another Ukrainian unit defending in this region, overrunning Russian defenders in this trench over here. And this is interesting because it was previously believed that the Ukrainians had full control over this trench system, and it appears they now do, but it seems like for a certain period of time in early December and late November, the Russian forces were actually able to counterattack and establish positions within parts of this trench system, which undermined the Ukrainian efforts to actually attack towards the northern outskirts of Novoprokopivka. And it does indicate that the Russian forces do have an increased presence, basically, an increased activity in the fields to the north of Novoprokopivka. But now the Ukrainians do appear to be strengthening their forces within this hill over here, this fortified hill. Now, moving on to the Avdiivka front, starting off in the south, there were reports from the pro-Russian information space that they were able to capture this quarry located just to the west of the rural dachas in the Promka industrial district. I won't dwell on this for too long just because there's no footage to back it up, so we're going to have to wait and see to really determine whether that claim is true. Now, looking at the area to the north of Avdiivka in the northern outskirts in these rural dachas, there was a video released by the Ukrainian Corn Group. So this is a drone unit of the 116th Mechanized Brigade, and what it shows is a tank which makes its way through the rural dachas, which really could be considered no man's land at this point, in firing towards Russian forward position. I think this is a geolocated marker for that Russian forward position, and they're able to dislodge the Russian forces. I don't think they take any casualties in the process. It's a very small group of infantry, I believe 3 or so, and they're forced to withdraw further back, which would be in the north direction. And this does indicate there is Russian activity going on within the northern outskirts of Avdiivka, but the Ukrainians are still sending in tanks and their own infantry with support from drones to try to counter that threat. So for now, there is no Russian breakthrough in this region, but this is a new area where the Russians are trying to send infantry to try to get information and perhaps try to get a foothold. Now, looking at the area south of Stepove, I'm going to go back and explain what's been going on over here since the 1st of December, because there's a lot of confusion about the state of the front line. So on December 1st, that's when we got the first confirmation of Russian forces really beginning to cross past the rail line in a significant amount of quantity and beginning to attack towards this trench. There was a trench over there and a tree line. And so the Russian front line looked a bit like this. The Russian forces were able to take over this tree line and overrun the Ukrainian defenders. We have this geolocated video to prove that. And they were able to overrun the 31st Mechanized Brigade. Now, in the days following that, I don't have a specific date, but really by the 4th of December, it was confirmed that the Ukrainian forces were able to reorganize and conduct a counterattack. This counterattack was led by the 47th Mechanized Brigade, and they received support from certain elements of the 67th Mechanized Brigade, which is mainly fighting on the Liman front. So we have the video over here, geolocated footage of the Ukrainian infantry with their Bradleys. They dismounted near the tree line, overran the Russian positions, and pushed further eastwards in this attack vector over here. And as the Russian forces were organizing their own forces around the rail line and trying to send them back towards the tree line in order to conduct a counterattack, they were spotted by the 47th Mechanized Brigade and hit by FPV and Bradley fire, which prevented the Russian counterattack from succeeding. Additionally, we saw footage released from the 8th Special Forces Regiment. This is a Ukrainian unit that's now been moved to the Avdiivka front, previously around Bakhmut. And what we'll see from this geolocated marker is that they were hitting the Russian forces with drone-dropped munitions and mortars as these Russian infantrymen were trying to entrench themselves in the northern entrance of the coke plants. And based on really the large scale of the Ukrainian shelling past the rail line within this rectangle over here, it seems very likely that the Russian forces have been able to amass more forces past the rail line than they were over the past weeks previous. And so the Russian forces have really expanded their control in this region, and they have increased the amount of troops past the rail line. And really the goal is to get a foothold in the northern entrance to the coke plant, which we're seeing them do right now, although there is very fierce Ukrainian resistance in that regard. And also to reach the southern flank of Stepove to pull pressure from the south. For now, the Ukrainian forces hold the line over here and have prevented further Russian expansion of what we can consider a salient, as I would refer to this area as the salient past the rail line. Now, looking at Stepove itself, the Russian forces have increased their presence within the eastern parts of the village, trying to set up permanent trenches in dugouts that are constructed by the Ukrainian forces, and they're sending infantry deeper into the houses. The ones that are still standing, of course, a lot of it is rubble, as can be seen in some of the following footage that I have linked on my map. And so over the past couple of days, the Russians have been expanding their control, trying to reach into the central part of the village. And that prompted a Ukrainian response, with Ukrainian forces sending in their tanks to engage with the Russian positions and firing towards them. So we have a video here of the Ukrainian tank hitting this Russian forward position, which does indicate there was a minor Russian advance amounting to a couple hundred meters. But for now, most of the village of Stepove, or at least what remains of it, is still a gray zone, with the Ukrainians putting in a large amount of resources into trying to hold the line to prevent the Russian forces from gaining full control over this area. And lastly, here we have confirmation from deep state maps that there was a minor Russian advance in the basically this height area in these fields that are in between the two rail lines. So we have these two rail lines over here that are located on heights. And then the claim by deep state is that the Russian forces were able to conduct minor advances. Really, this amounts to the total advance around this perimeter over here. So it is just a minor advance along some of the tree lines where we saw previous Ukrainian resistance, which prompted Russian shelling, and then their infantry overran those positions. So it seems like over the past couple of days, the Russian forces in this area did try to expand control towards the junction that connects these two rail lines together, which is actually located on a dominant height that overlooks some of the other fields in the region. Now, moving on to the Bakhmut front, there was a very significant claim made by pro-Russian sources that the Russian forces were able to completely take over this height, which overlooks the entire village of Klishivka. Because if you saw my previous video, I showed you guys how there's like this entire topography over here that is extremely important in determining the course of Russia's offensive activities and Ukrainian defensive positions. And so, for instance, Klishivka is located on a valley which is overlooked by heights to the west, which are under Ukrainian control over here, which played a big role in the Ukrainian forces actually taking over Klishivka from the Russians. And then on an even more local level, you have this height over here, which is also extremely fortified, which has at least previously been under Ukrainian control. But now it's being disputed. The Russian sources claim that this height, which is called Height 215.7, was fully taken over by Russian forces. And to back this up, there was a news segment released by Russian Channel 1, which shows that they were in a command center of the Russian forces on the Klishivka front. And within that command node, you had elements of the Chechen Akhmat fighters and the LPR's 4th Motorized Brigade, which is also fighting on Bakhmut's southern flank. So here you have this unit over here. And so in the video, it's the command center. You can see the drone operators as they're coordinating with the Russian infantry on the ground on the Bakhmut front. So the drone operators are giving them reconnaissance information. They're fixing artillery and mortar fire onto the Ukrainian forces located on trenches and dugouts. And then we also have this overhead view as Russian forces overrun the Ukrainian defensive positions. The issue is, I don't know the geolocation for this. There's not been a geolocation done for it yet, so it could be from somewhere other than this height. Although it is probably from the sector, it is hard to tell where it was specifically located, so I don't want to make any sort of claims before we have the evidence to back it up. But either way, it is confirmed by Ukrainian sources that this height is being contested. So for now, I'm leaving the northern part as a gray zone, but I don't want to say that the Russian forces control it. But this does back up the claims made by Russian sources previously, and which was also confirmed by deep state maps, that the Russian forces were able to advance further south towards those heights over the past week, which does mean that they have positions in some of the open fields and in the forested areas to the north of those heights, which would allow them to have this passageway to attack the heights from the north. Although for now, we don't have a full understanding of what's going on over here. What we do know based on the news segment released by the Russian side is that there was overhead footage showing a massive Russian artillery bombardment of Ukrainian positions on the trench, which could indicate that at least at the time of the recording, it was under Ukrainian control. We don't know what happened since then, but it does show how the Russians were investing a lot of their artillery component on this front to try to degrade the Ukrainian forces that are stationed over here. And lastly, there was a claim made by the pro-Russian side again about alleged gains in the areas to the south of the Avdiivka. So I'll show the perimeter of the claimed advances, which would be along various forested areas, reaching all the way to this road which connects Avdiivka to Bokhmut. So this would be the claim by the Russian side that I saw, and this is not backed up by any sort of geolocated footage. The only footage that I've seen from the area to the northwest of Bohdaniivka is this marker over here, which shows Russian artillery targeting Ukrainian defensive positions. There was, I believe, a firing position over here. You had Ukrainian machine gun fire trying to hold off Russian assaults, but there's no actual video evidence of Russian forces advancing in this region as far as I'm aware. But regardless of whether these reports are true, I would still keep an eye out for this region that I'll mark in this blue rectangle, because it does still have a regional significance to the front line. A lot of these areas that are under Ukrainian control right next to the front line are located on hills that are overlooking Bohdaniivka. There's an entire ridge to the northwest of the village of Bohdaniivka that's overlooking it. And this is one of the main reasons why the Ukrainians have been able to hold on to the village for so long. And those same heights give you an entranceway into the village of Avdiivka, and by extension gives you positions right next to the Donbass Canal, including an opportunity to cross over it, which would be a more long-term goal for the Russian forces. But at least for now, it would mean that the Russian forces would have positions on heights that are of similar elevation to the Ukrainian positions that are located right next to the Donbass Canal. And so I would still keep an eye out for this region. Additionally, just because of the supply line that leads in from Avdiivka into Bohdaniivka. And so that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.